But know that this is a white key, this is a white key. There would be on a piano a black key here. Between D and E, there is a D sharp or an E flat. Then there's a white key, an E. Between E and F, there is not an E sharp. There is not an F flat. So that would be another white key. So this is those two black keys on a piano. You'd see between the C and the D and the D and the E. Between the F and the G, there's an F sharp or G flat. Then there's a white key. Then there's another black key, a white key. Between A and B, there's an A sharp or a B flat. And so and between B and C, there's no accidental. So obviously, this looks familiar, doesn't it? This is a keyboard. Okay, so the whole point to this is music theory, and the music that we listen to is based off of the major scale. Once we understand that formula, that there is a whole step, half step, whole, half. 2 wholes, a half, 3 wholes, and a half. We could also call these, instead of whole step and half step, we could call this a tone, semitone, tone, semitone. Same thing as saying whole step or half step. So this is the pattern of the major scale. All of our music that we're listening to is based off of this pattern, what we call the major scale. Now, we're going to harmonize the major scale. So what I've done is listed all the notes in the key of C. This is the major scale in the key of C. There's no sharps, no flats, all the white keys on a piano. And I'm going to show you how to build chords. And we're going to build chords off of each note of the major scale. We are going to harmonize the major scale. And once you understand this, you cannot not understand this. This will affect you for life. Ready? And we're also going to layer in a few different systems that in other trainings you don't normally see these combined. However, this is critical and important. So we're going to talk about the Roman numerals. We're going to talk about Romans, Greek, Roman numerals, and the names of the modes. And we're going to describe these in a way that I haven't seen described anywhere else. It's really strange. Out of so many videos on YouTube, I've never seen this, but here you go. Okay, a chord. What is a chord? A chord is a harmonization. It is basically simply, if we take the major scale, and we could number the notes in the major scale, and we could say this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Before we get back to the octave, which we could say is 8, we could keep counting and call this 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We could say that. And so underneath the major scale, underneath the C scale, I have notated there's the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th, the 9th, 11th, and 13th. So to make a chord, it's simply this. We take whatever note we're starting from and we skip a note in the major scale and we go to the next note. So this is the root of the chord. We skip the 2nd, and then we play the 3rd. So the 1st and the 3rd, it's either going to have a quality of major or minor. As you can see, when we get down here on the 2nd chord, it will be a minor 3rd. And I'll show you how that makes sense in a second. But then we skip another note. We don't play the 4th. Instead, we play the 5th. Now, the 1, 3, 5 of a chord is a triad. This is the foundation of a chord. Now we can add upper extensions simply by skipping the next note and playing, instead of the 6th, we can play the 7th. We can skip a note and play the 9th. We can skip a note and play the 11th. We can skip a note and play the 13th. The 11th is essentially the 4th up an octave. The 13th is essentially the 6th up an octave. Now we can also play the 6th. It's often a pretty note. So these are extensions beyond the triad. The 9 is essentially the 2 that is up an octave. But what you need to know is 1, 3, 5, our triad. Everything here musically is based off of triads. That's the foundational chord structure. Now, when we create a triad or create a chord, we just skip a note, skip a note. That's it. So what happens when we start not on just C? Oh, by the way, when we play, let's say the first 4 notes, we skip a note in the major scale and play the 1, 3, 5, and 7. This gives us a quality. Now this is a C major 7 chord. So the 1 chord in a key, in a major scale, the 1 chord built off that key will be a major 7 quality. We can also call this the Ionian mode. This is the key and the major Ionian key that we're in. We're in C, all the white keys on a piano. Now, when we create a chord off the 2nd scale degree, this is called Dorian. It's the 2nd scale degree of the Ionian major key, major scale key. The Ionian is also known as the major scale. It is the 1. It is a capital 1. Similar, you will see a capital 4 and a capital 5. The 1, 4, and 5 chords are major. The 2, 3, 6 chords are minor, and the 7 is what we'll call, it's a half diminished. And we'll get to that in a moment. And this is all the same thing. We're just skipping a note between. And this gives us the 1 of this chord starting on the 2nd scale degree. So we have a D. So we're in the key of C, C Ionian. We're harmonizing the major scale. So we're building a chord on every single scale degree. And we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's it. So when we have a chord progression and you hear me say, oh, let's play a 1, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1 in C. What are we playing? Well, we're playing the 1, a 3, 1, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. The 6 will be minor, the 2 will be minor. Later on, we'll discuss secondary dominants and talk about how this could be major or a dominant 7. That's not in this conversation just yet. Two, Dorian mode. Dorian just means 2nd scale degree of the major scale, the parent key that we're in this case, C. There's no sharps or flats here. So D, skip a note, F, skip a note, A, skip a note, C. We have a D minor 7. The 2 chord, the Dorian mode, the 2 chord, if you're have an Ionian C, the 2 chord is D minor 7. Now we're going to build a chord off of the 3rd scale degree, being E. So again, we skip a note, skip a note, skip a note. We have again a E minor 7. Now, this notation down here, where does this flat 3rd, flat 7 come from? On the Phrygian, where does this flat 3rd 7, flat 9, flat 11, flat 13 come from? This is actually, if we compare E Phrygian to E Ionian, E Ionian has 4 sharps. You don't need to really know this, and especially if you're learning on guitar, it's all basically shapes. But I'm going to just share with you real quick that normally the 2 is in E scale, the F, G, C, and D notes are the sharp ones. So that's in the key of E Ionian. Those are sharp. But in E Phrygian, we have a G natural instead of a G sharp, so that makes it a flat third. We have a D natural instead of a D sharp, which makes it a flat 7, as compared to E Ionian. Now, once you grasp this, these are how musicians all think about all these chords. They're building triads, 1, 3, and 5. You basically skip a note in a major scale, but what key are we in? And it's confusing a lot of times because different schools of music they will call Aeolian mode the 6th scale degree. They'll also call that natural minor. They will also just call that a minor key. However, Dorian and Phrygian and Aeolian are all minor modes. So this is where I disagree to call this A minor. Because A minor could be the 2 of G. A minor could be the 3 of F. A minor could be the 6 of C. A minor could be part of it could be a minor, those are the main 3. I'll just leave it there. I'm not going to go into Locrian. Most people don't even think of Locrian. Locrian and diminished and half diminished chords are generally used for passing tones and are not often stable chords in anybody's songs. It is 99.9% rare. So with that being said, 1 through 6 are basically the chords that you're playing in any song. So we're just going to go through and see what do we have here. The 4-chord Lydian mode has a major 7 tonality. So if we forget the alphabet, we could just know that the 4 has a major 7. In fact, I could notate that here. But basically the thing is, there's a major 7, there's a 9, 11, and 13 on the 4-chord. So we're just looking at the formula that can be transcribed into any key, no matter how many sharps or flats there are. Whether it's C, we can forget the alphabet, because what I want you to take away from this is the Nashville numbers system. It is a combination of this Greek modal name, it is a combination of this Roman numeral, and it is a shorthand to identify chords. In saying, a question I just got was, what is a chord progression that you like? And I will say a 1, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. Now, you could say in any key. And if I said G, I'm going to refer to that as G Ionian. And so this 1 chord would equal G based on this. Now, if I said, hey, I don't want it in G, in fact, I want this in B flat, then the 1 chord would equal B flat. Now, when you get to guitar, you'll start to see the patterns. The more that you see the music like this and you see the chords like this will liberate you. This will show you the structure of all the songs that you're playing. You will understand fundamentally the intervals. You'll have an interval sense between the distance of what this sounds like, going to this, going to this, going to this, and it's just like a baby or a child learning to speak, say, English. They may hear all these words for years and not know what they mean, but once they start to understand what they mean and have context for what the words and phrases that they're hearing and now speaking are meaning, then they can recognize those patterns. So next time you hear this progression, no matter what key it is, you know that that's jazz. and you recognize that. When you hear this 5-to-1 sound and you understand that sound internally, you start to recognize that. No matter what the key is, you understand the dynamic between this and this. And this, what I'm pointing out, is actually very critical. So we'll continue, and I will actually notate the 1 has a major 7. The 2 is a minor 7. The 3 is a minor 7. The 4 is a major 7. The 5 is a dominant 7. What does that mean? It is a major triad, a 1, 3, and 5. And instead of a major 7, it has a flat 7. How do we determine that this is a flat 7? We're in G mixolydian, which means we're in the key of C. We're in the 5 of a chord. What is G the 5 of? G is the 5 of the key of C. If this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's what G mixolydian means. We are in the 5 of a key. So what is the alphabet? What's the note? It is G. This is in a musical context with a band or looking at a chart. This is the thought process. There is a G, 7 chord. It has a root, third, and a fifth, and a flat 7. Why is that a flat 7? What does that mean? Because we are comparing this set of notes, this basically G mixolydian, the key of C, we're comparing it to the key of G Ionian, G major. In the key of G major, there is 1 sharp, and it is F sharp. So when we're looking at this, the chord formula, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, we're calling this a flat 7 because in this instance, when we're spelling the chord, this F is not sharp, it is natural. And compared to the G Ionian scale, the G Ionian key, let's say the key of G, this would be a flat 7. So we're using numbers in a few different contexts, in a few different ways, right? There's one way to spell the chord in the key that we're in. So if we spelled it in G mixolydian, G is the 5. Mixolydian is a mode of a parent key, which is the major scale, also known as Ionian. We have this scale formula, or this chord formula, rather. I know this can be complex and confusing sounding, but once you grasp this, once you realize that there's different ways to use these numbers to explain the chord formula, there's different ways to use these numbers to explain the chord progression. There's different ways to use these numbers to explain the position within the key. Ionian, we're going to call this major. This is the major key or the major scale. You'll hear it referenced to. You'll hear this also referenced as this is the key. But it's challenging because some people will say, they will look at this and say, this is a key. This is the key of A minor. And I think that confuses everybody. Most people, a lot of people. The function that people are calling that A minor, that they're not fully seeming to digest, is the power of, there's 3 different chord qualities, let's say. So chord qualities. You have a major triad. You have a minor triad. You have a major seventh. You have a minor seven. And you have a dominant seven. And you can also have a diminished triad / seven. They can both be diminished triad and a diminished seventh. Diminished is simply minor thirds stacked on top of each other. And in the key of B, they're in the key of B Locrian. It's a flat seven. There's a flat third. Basically, it's minor thirds stacked on top of each other. Actually, before I type that, I don't even know. I'm not even going to talk about Locrian because I don't know. I have to think about that for a second. But basically, chord qualities. There's a major triad. What is a major triad? A major triad is, here's the chord formula, is a 1, 3, 5. A minor triad has a 1, flat 3, and a 5. A major 7 has a 1. It's a major triad with a major seventh. A minor seventh chord is a minor triad with a flat 7. Now here's the piece. The dominant 7 chord, I'll make this look a little bit more like a 7. This dominant 7 chord has a specific function, and it is built off of a major triad with a flat 7. Okay. The function of a dominant chord, this is very important, and this is where a lot of people in the music world, in college and everywhere, are messed up. This, just understanding resolution. So there's tension and release. There's dissonance and harmony. There's the yin and yang. There's the roller coaster ride. There's the emotional tension that's built up, and there's the resolve. Now, there are different ways to resolve tension in music. However, the most used, most common, 95% way to resolve, it's like in the book Quadrivium, it relates this. I'll actually kind of try to articulate this. If the one chord is also known as the tonic, or let's call it home. Now this is interesting. There's another. How do we call these? These are perceptions, sort of such. If we're in the Ionian mode, we're in the major key. G7 is the 5 chord of C, or C major 7. If home bass to us sounds like C, the key of C, and that major 7, by the way, is optional. If you play that major 7, it won't feel resolved. Because if we think of a kind of like planets, there's gravitational pull. So if the 1 is like home, it is like earth. The 2 and the 7 are the closest to this 1. They have a strong gravitational pull. The 5 chord and the 4 chord This is like the sun, and it is always shining on the earth. The sun is always shining down on some part of the planet. It's always hitting the earth. The 4 chord is like the moon, and it can even have some mooning properties, like sometimes it goes minor, like the Beatles in different songs. And then you have the 3 and 6 chords. Which have some different functions to get us back to the, they don't necessarily go to the 1 chord all the time, right? So oftentimes they might go either way. So I wrote down this progression over here, this 1, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1 concept. This is going to get, okay, so what do we call these? These are like perceptions, lenses or something. So like, let's look at this progression and say 5, 1 is what we're talking about, a dominant 7. So G7 going to C. It's actually the story of G sus. G sus is a suspended chord, is when you raise or lower the 3rd to make an ambiguous chord. Because a 3rd and a 7th are the tones in a chord that really define. You could say gender, if it's major or minor. Is that like a gender in music? In a chord, maybe, kind of. It's kind of disambiguous. It gives it a certain quality. It's either major, minor, diminished, augmented, or dominant. These are the qualities of chords, okay? And let me streamline this thought. In this chord progression, the 5, 1. The 5 wants to go back to 1, just like the sun wants to shine on the earth. And the 4 doesn't always necessarily want to go back to the 1. You can resolve going to a 4, 1, 4, 1 progression instead of a 5 to 1. But the unique thing I'll show you about in the major key, this whole situation that we've been outlining, the function of the dominant chord going back to the 1, the 5 to the 1, the function of this, here it goes. The 3rd is a half or a semitone away from the root of the 1 chord. And so the 3rd of the 5 chord is the 7 of the 1 chord. And again, the 7 is next to the 1 in the scale, and it has a very strong gravitational pull to there. Now, what is the 3rd of the 1 chord? It is E. And the 5 chord has this, the flat 7 of the 5 chord is a semitone or a half tone above, away from the 3rd of the 1 chord. So you're seeing the only 2 places in the major scale where there are half tones and semitones. This is the strongest magnetic pull, and you have both of them when you move from the 5 chord to the 1 chord. Does this make sense? If we notate this again, if we just notate it like keys on a piano, just so that you can see there, the note up here, this is a black key on a piano to signify that. And these have black keys on the piano. So we're basically looking at a piano up there. Between here is a half step or a semitone. Between here is a half step or a semitone. Those are the only two places in the major scale that occurs. Look at the piano. The only two places where two white keys are next to each other without a black key in between them. And what we're seeing is that the function of the 5 chord going to the 1 chord has the strongest resolution in all of music. It's the story of Jesus. So G is called the dominant. G is the dominant. Again, this is the formula for a dominant 7. It's a 1, 3, 5, and a flat 7. G is the dominant chord of the pure scale. The pure scale being C, meaning there's no accidentals. There's no sharps or flats. There are no black keys on the piano in this key. The whole pattern of music is shown visibly on the piano that it's based off of the major scale. This pattern, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. That's it. Now, the function of the dominant chord. By the way, the dominant is written like that, 7. That is the notation for a dominant chord. When you say G7, that presumes a dominant chord, a major triad with a flat 7. When you have this triangle and a 7, or just the triangle and a 9 even, that presumes there is a major 7. It's a 1, 3, 5 triad, major triad with a major 7. A major 7 means it's like a half step away from the octave, the root of the chord. It has a very pretty sound. It's maybe the prettiest chord. It's one of the prettiest chord tonalities. The 1 chord and the 4 chord in this pattern, when you harmonize this pattern, this major scale pattern, the 1 chord and the 4 chord have major 7ths. The 5 chord is a dominant 7. The 2, 3, and 6 are all minor 7th chords. Why is the mode information helpful to know? If I said D Dorian, I'm like, okay, Dorian means the 2 of a key. What is D the 2 of? It is the 2 of C. So if I'm in C major or C Ionian, C major key, major scale, the key of C, I know that D is my 2. The information around that is that there's a D minor 7 chord. There is a 9, 11, and 13. Now if I'm in Phrygian, I'll have a minor 7 chord, but I'll have a flat 9, flat 11, and flat 13. So my shorthand to understand this when I'm improvising is knowing where I'm at within the major key, within this pattern. If I'm on the 3 chord, I think, okay, another term for that is Phrygian or Phrygian mode, but I don't have to learn a scale shape or a pattern so much. I just know that there's this information, and as primarily a guitar player, there's shapes and patterns, and I know that if I just play the pentatonic shape, there's a different placement for this 9 versus a flat 9. There's a different placement for this 11 versus a flat 11. They're just 1 fret apart. These are 1 fret down in the shape that I'm playing. You know, if I'm playing a Dorian shape or a Phrygian shape or an Aeolian shape, has a mix. It has a flat 11 and a flat 13. You know? So the dominant. The 5, 7, a G7 in this case, going to the 1. I put major 7, but again, to fully resolve the chord, like at the end of a song, you generally will not play a major 7 because that's kind of unresolved. Again, it has a tension to it that wants to resolve back to the 1 very strongly when you play a 7. It's 1 half step or 1 semitone away from this note. This is stronger than the 2 going to the 1 because this is a whole step or a whole tone away. This is a semitone or a half step. This has a much stronger pull than this does. And this chord, again, has both this interval and this interval when resolving to the 1. So here's the thing. Every chord has a fifth. Every chord. So not only in the parent key of C major, but no matter what chord progression we're in, check this out. The 3 is the 5 of the 6 chord. How do you mean? Well, if we have the 6 chord is right here, let's look at this real quick. If we're counting this and we say this is 6. Now let's say we're playing, now this is going to be, basically I wrote it down here. What's the 6th chord? It's A minor 7. Like we've already built off of this scale. That's what we're seeing, right? So this is the, A is the 6 of the parent key, the scale, the Ionian mode, the major scale, the key we're in. Now, if we number this relative, like we did down here, to this mode, the 6th scale degree of the key of C, and if we number this as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, just as we did down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that all lines up. See how we're doing? Actually, there's the G. See that? So this 7th, and this is the 7th. That's what I'm just showing you. E is the 5 chord. E is the 5 chord. E is also the 3 of the parent key. So back to here. When this is referring to the parent key, whatever the alphabet is, it doesn't even matter. This is the formula that's happening. So here's a unique thing that we can do in progressions. We could make, because this 3 of the parent key, this E, so if this, let's just say this was C, just because we're doing it over on the rest of the page as C. Let's call this C. This is the 1. The 3 is E. Normally it's E minor. The 6 is A minor. D minor is the 2. G or G7 is the 5. And back to C. That's the chord progression in the key of C. But because E is the 3 chord, the 3 chord is the 5 of the 6 chord, E is the 5 of A, we can make this chord dominant instead of minor, so that it has the functionality of creating a strong resolution to whatever is the tonic. We could call it modal interchange. We can call it secondary dominance. So not only so it may even be more appropriate to not even use the Roman numerals right there. it may be more appropriate to use simple, hey, that's the 5 and that's the 1. You see how there's different ways we can think about all these numbers? Like there's a way to think of the numbers in building a chord and the chord formula. There's a way of using the numbers in building the chord and in the scale that we're in. There's a way in using the Roman numerals to show us in the scale that we're in where we are in that scale. Dorian says, or this 2 small Roman numeral 2 says we're in Dorian. We're on the 2nd scale degree of the major scale. Phrygian, the 3, says we are in the 3rd scale degree of the major scale. Roman numeral 4 says we are in the 4th scale degree of the major scale. Roman numeral 5, we are in the 5th scale degree of the major scale. Roman numeral 6, we are in the 6th scale degree of the major scale. That's all the modes mean. They show us our location within the major scale. Schools have got that not clear for the world. The function of the dominant chord and what we're going to call secondary dominance is crucial in songs, in music that you play and that you listen to. Instead of being E minor right here, we can turn this into an E7. I'm going to play that for you on guitar. So when we harmonize the major scale, here's C, that's the 1 chord, okay? There's the 1 chord. D minor 7, that's the 2 chord. E minor 7, Phrygian, that's the 3 chord. And then we've got the F, major 7, to the G dominance. There's the G triad, here's the G dominant 7. Now you hear that wants to resolve. I'm just going to resolve it real quick to the C. Hear that? How that, there's the G chord going, the G triad, 1, 3, 5, going to C. 5, 1. And here's the G7. When we add that dominant 7, it gives it that extra tension to resolve to the 1 chord. Here's the G7. Where does that note want to go? Let's go down. And this major 3rd wants to go up. So back again. This is the strongest resolution in music, the 5 to the 1, the dominant to whatever it is the dominant of. And again, every chord can have its own 5 chord. That 1, whether we call that the 1, that is the tonic. That is the note that we're resolving to in this constellations kind of version of it. So let's play this chord progression. I'll play it first with an E minor and not an E minor 7. So 1, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1 sounds like this in the key of C. So that's very vanilla. Sounds really vanilla because it's just a diatonic chord progression. Diatonic chord progression simply means there were only these notes. There were no notes outside of those notes. So I harmonized the major scale and played that. To give this song and potentially the melody that accompanies it a little bit more flavor, we use a secondary dominant. And because this is the 5 of 1, the function of the dominant chord, we can make this a 7. Not only did we make this a 7, but normally this E had a 1, a 1 flat 3, 5, and a flat 7. That was the formula for an E minor 7 in the key of C. The Phrygian mode, the third of the key of C, that was the formula. But we changed it. We raised the third. Basically just raised the third. The flat 7 remains. Here's what that sounds like. Hear how that resolves stronger to the 6th chord, to that A minor? Play those first 3 again. I'll do it diatonic, meaning E, the 3 chord will be minor. Here we go. Sounds kind of like classical music, right? Well, here it is when the E is a 7 chord. Here we go. You might be saying, hey, if the 3 chord is the 6 of A, then that would mean the 2 chord is, or if the 3 chord is the 5 of the 6 chord, that looks like the same interval as the 2 is the 5 of the 5 chord. So we could make that a 7th chord too. Now, is the A a 5 of the 2 chord? So how would we find that out? We would probably just say, hey, where's the 2 chord? Looks, there's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The A is the 5 of the 2 chord. So we're doing a cycle of fifths progression. Any of these 3, they could be minor, or they could be a major triad with a flat 7. Any of those 3 chords. This gives us outside of the box notes. Here's what this now sounds like. C7. Now what is, so if I just went C7, I'm adding 1 to it here. I'm going to extend this. If I say C7, what is C the 5 chord of? C is the 5 chord of the 4 chord, the F. And here's where the F can turn moony. It can turn into a minor. In songs, it does that. So let me write down what I just did. We're going to call that a 1-7, or we can call that a 5-7, 2-7, 6-7, 3-7. This is a 4, and this is a 4 minor. So now we're getting into the Nashville number system. Now, if I just did, took that out, I might call that a 6 minor. And that would be an A minor. And that's possible too. I could go... C7 as the 1-7 to the 4. And then I'm going to go to the 3 chord, but I'm going to make it minor. To 6, 2-7, to the 5-7 and just resolve it on a C triad. We covered secondary dominance. Check this out. This is how we're going to notate that. This is acting not as a 3-7. We could call it that, but really this is basically acting as a 5-6. This is acting as a 5-5. That's a secondary dominant. You could choose to put a 7 there, but we know what that means. A 5 chord can be dominant 7. We don't have to notate a 7 on those. That's just a 5-5. That's a 5-6. If I made this a 7th chord again, what is it now? That's a 5-2. In this case, where the C goes to C7, the 1 goes to the 1-7, what is that? That is a 5-4. And that F going to F minor, that's just the moon, a moon cycle, a moon phase, a moony sounding quality of a 4 chord. Like, we didn't have to notate a separate notation for this 5-1 because it's natural within our pattern of music. This is the major scale. Do you get this? Watch it again if you need help. There's going to be supplementary materials on all this, but if you can comprehend this and start playing with it, when you hear that 4-4 minor, when you're out of the cafes, you'll know exactly what that is. When you hear this, you'll know what that is. You're building your vocabulary. You're not just saying, oh, what are the chords to that song? Oh, it's A, C, G. Okay, cool. No, you're like understanding the formula, the patterns of music that are within all the music we're listening to and playing. And this builds your vocabulary and makes you a better musician and a better listener, just because you're understanding the language of music. Okay, so I'll play this chord progression again, and I'll play it with an E minor first and then an E7. One way you can notate this with the Nashville numbers system is the timing of this. I'll go ahead and do this, so check this out. I'll say, we'll do an E minor, but then I'll do an E7 and I'll put it in one bar. We'll do an A minor and I'll do an A7 in one bar. We'll do a D minor and a D7 in one bar, and then a G to a G7, that'll be in one bar. Okay, so you can kind of hear the diatonic version of the 3 chord, then the diatonic version of the 6 chord, the diatonic of the 2 chord, but then we'll make it a secondary dominant as it moves to the next chord. So these, we would notate this as a 3 minor. And if I had space in here, I would say, well, it's really a 5-6. I wouldn't call it a 3-7 necessarily. You could, for a shorthand, that could be helpful, but knowing that that's a 5-6 is the secondary dominant. So here we go. So 2. minor to a 2/7, 5/7 to a 1. So I'll just express one more thing. When we go to this E7, when it's the secondary dominant, I'll throw in the notes that we're adding so you can see that clearly. So the major third of an E chord, we're adding a G sharp. The major third of an A chord, we're adding a C sharp. The major third of a D chord is an F sharp. When we raise when we have a dominant 7 for the 1 chord, when we have a dominant 7 instead of a major 7 there, we've got a, how do we call it? We could call it an A sharp or a B flat. Normally, horn players and stuff would reference a B flat. It's rare that you talk about an A sharp, but because we do have a string of sharps going on, we could call it an A sharp. But know that it's inharmonically equivalent, the same as a B flat. Same as F sharp being the same thing as a G flat. You could call it that. Or a C sharp is the same thing as a D flat. The G sharp is the same thing as an A flat. So they're inharmonically equivalent ways of naming things, but usually you will see a B flat in most keys that are common for especially horn players and things. Flat key would be like the key of F as a B flat. Okay. So why did I draw that? Because I'm showing the G sharp, C sharp, F sharp, A sharp. We added some color into the scale. We took this note, C sharp, we took this note, the G sharp, we had that A sharp, and then we had the F sharp. So because of using secondary dominants, we were able to add these colors in an otherwise kind of bland or vanilla. We added some chocolate chips into the music with the use of secondary dominants, with the use of the function of the 5 going to a 1 and realizing that every chord has a 5 chord. The 3 is the 5 of the 6. The 6 is the 5 of the 2. The 2 is the 5 of the 5. And the 5 obviously is the 5 of the 1 chord. The 1 is also the 5 of the 4 chord. All right, digest that. Get back to me. Let me know how that sits with you. All right.